Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, we report on the growing and dangerous divide between feminism and transgender rights. I'll be talking to Dr Finn Mackay, the British sociologist and campaigner who believes it is possible to champion both women's and trans rights. Also, Me Too in the world of athletics. We meet one former French athlete who's shining a spotlight on cases of sexual abuse and violence. But first, it's a debate that continues to grow and in some cases has become highly polarising. That is, what makes a woman or a man? For some feminists, there are differences between women who are born with female genitalia and those who go on to identify themselves as women. But many transgender people believe pointing out such differences is discriminatory. Shirley Sitbon reports.
The decision sent shockwaves among transgender women and beyond. The International Swimming Federation decided in June to ban virtually all transgender females from women's categories in international events. In a new policy on, quote, gender inclusion, the Federation says studies show that even when trans women take medication to suppress testosterone, they still retain a physical advantage over cis women, those whose gender corresponds to the one assigned to them at birth, something trans women deny.
There are many studies that show that there is no competitive advantage for trans women in sports. And also, if we look at the decision of the FINA, they allegedly back it by science, but the only reference points they take is by looking at the data from cis males that have gone through puberty and compare them to cis females. So they say it's backed on science, backed on data, but in fact it's just a large misinformation campaign.
Trans activists believe anyone can self-identify as male or female. For them, going through surgery to change genitalia is not necessary. On the opposite side of the spectrum, some feminists believe gender is biological and immutable. They're accused of being TERF, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. Tension between those feminists and trans women has turned aggressive on Twitter and in some protest events. In the wide variety of feminists, many do not reject trans women, but do see differences.
I am not transphobic. What I am against is the idea that women and trans women are exactly the same and they are the same group. That is just not true. They have different medical needs, different sporting achievements, different social experiences, and we need words to be able to differentiate those two. Trans people and trans women in particular should have their own services, their own spaces. They should be protected from harm and danger and violence and discrimination, but women have their own needs.
With societies evolving fast on gender, authorities and activists have to find solutions to de-escalate tension and allow everyone to feel included.
And joining me now from Bristol is Dr Finn Mackay, a sociologist at the University of the West of England and author of Female Masculinities and the Gender Wars, The Politics of Sex. Dr Mackay, thank you so much for your time. Why has the debate in Britain, in particular, become so incredibly polarised?
Well, it can't be separated here in the UK from the burgeoning culture wars that the Conservative government are whipping up at the moment, with attacks on anti-racist organising, environmental campaigners, crackdowns on the right to protest and free speech, for example. And these attacks on transgender rights and the progress of transgender rights, I believe, are part of those broader culture wars. But here in the UK in 2018, the Westminster government launched a public consultation on reforming the Gender Recognition Act 2004. And that really drew attention to trans lives, to trans communities, to trans rights. And as when any social movement gets increased attention, you also get increased backlash. And from that time here in the UK, there's been a lot of backlash to trans rights as well.
But I want to bring you back, Dr Mackay, to this divide between feminists and transgender rights activists. What is behind this highly divided debate.
Well, I think the media likes to construct this as a battle between feminists and trans women. I don't think it is. There is feminist theory and politics, particularly from a school of feminism called lesbian feminism, which has political and theoretical arguments against trans inclusion. But I don't believe that that is widely read or widely understood, certainly not in the mainstream. What we're seeing is a burgeoning sex and gender conservatism, which unfortunately is attractive to people, particularly at times of economic and political and social uncertainty and upheaval as we are living through at the moment.
Is it possible, however, to find middle ground?
I get asked this question a lot about the middle ground, and it's important to note there can be no middle ground when it comes to exclusion and prejudice and marginalisation. When there's groups, as there are here in the UK, who are supported by and reported on in the national press, who are demanding a rolling back of what fragile rights there already are, an actual removal of what existing human rights there are for trans people in this country, there can be no middle ground on that. So it's important to make that clear from the start.
But is there not middle ground between those women's activists and transgender activists, especially at the moment in an era where women's rights are coming under attack? For instance, in the US, the overturning of the Roe v. Wade, meaning that same-sex marriage and transgender rights are also now under serious threat. Therefore, don't people need to unite more than ever?
Absolutely. There is much more that we should be uniting together on. These attacks on bodily integrity affect everybody. And there's another area that I think doesn't get enough attention, as I've mentioned in my book, which is male violence against women and children. Trans people are also affected by sexual violence. And this is an area on which people could be active together. We should be joining together to campaign against these attacks.
But can you understand why some women's activists feel that they're under threat given the sort of debate we're now having in regards to the use of language? Or is that something that comes back to miscommunication, misunderstanding, and also the role of the media?
There is a lot of willful misinformation spread about by the media, so much so that people now think, and women now think, that they're going to go to their normal doctor's surgery and they're going to be referred to as a uterus haver or a chest feeder. That is simply not the case. We are now getting inclusive guides, inclusive language, inclusive toolkits for people, healthcare professionals that are working with trans and non-binary people. Those are progressive shifts to include people who have never even had names, who have never even been recognised, who have been overlooked. So that is a positive move to include those who have historically been left out.
Dr Finn Mackay, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, beyond the medals, the admiration and determination that comes with high-level sports, there's also the harsh reality of sexual abuse and violence. On average, 1 in 7 elite athletes in France has been subjected to sexual violence before the age of 18. Sophie Lamotte meets one former athlete who's fighting a Me Too campaign here in France.
She was on track to become an Olympic medalist. Emma Uju was one of the best performing athletes of her generation. But in 2020, she retired from her sport. She said she was sexually assaulted by her coach at the age of 19. She couldn't bear to see him still in the job and coaching in impunity.
I had a really difficult experience. There were several disciplinary commissions that suspended the coach I accused back in 2018. He was suspended once, and then the suspension was lifted, so he's still in contact with young athletes.
Emma denounces a whole system that leads to violence, where athletes are thought to constantly push their limits and coaches glorify suffering. She gathered testimonies from more than 50 victims and sheds light on 5 of them in a documentary.
When he gave us massages, he tried to touch us as much as he could. Usually massage for athletes is around the calves and thighs, but he would touch us in other places, and that got worse over time.
Veronique Labar is the founder and president of the Ethics and Sports Committee, one of the few helplines for young victims in sports. It was recently dissolved. She blames sports institutions for failing to provide much-needed support.
The institutions seek, in the vast majority of cases, to bury the story, to oust the victims from the club, from the federation, to muzzle them.
The federation claims it follows a zero-tolerance policy and says it will review the issue, especially in view of the upcoming Olympic Games held in Paris in 2024.
And that's all for now. You can keep up with the 51% on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. Plus, you can catch our previous programmes on the France 24 website. So until our next show, bye for now.